craft shown in this video is included in your video booklet. I hope that this video will inspire you to try some of these unusual recipes or fragrant decorations at your own holiday festivities this year. And perhaps you'll even consider growing a few herbs of your own next spring. But you know, you don't have to have a lush herb garden like this to enjoy fresh cut herbs. You can buy herbs from farmers markets or produce stores to dry or to use fresh and delicate recipes or fragrant herbal wreaths. In fact, later I'm going to show you how you can create a beautiful herbal wreath using fresh cut herbs. But first, I want to show you an unusual way to bake herb bread for your holiday table. A few years back, I began baking bread in flower pots after seeing the idea in a country-style cookbook. I guess other people saw that same idea because recently I've seen several versions of flower pot bread in herb magazines and recipe booklets. It's a wonderful and unusual way to present herb bread for your holiday table. I like to bake a small flower pot for each guest and then reheat it in the oven just before serving. I then set the flower pot in front of the place setting and it becomes part of the table arrangement. Now, to make this bread, you must first prepare or season clean, unused flower pots. Wash and dry the flower pots well, and then you're going to brush each flower pot with some plain vegetable oil. And make sure that you cover the entire flower pot inside and on the bottom because it's going to soak into the clay. After you have all of your flower pots brushed with oil, bake them at 450 degrees for 1 hour. Then you're going to remove them and let them cool. Now when you have all your flower pots ready, then you can get your bread dough ready. Now you can either use yeast dough or you can use something like this. This is frozen bread dough. Now frozen bread dough is available in either loaves or in little rolls. Both of them work great. I prefer the little rolls. They're a little bit more convenient. All you have to do to get this ready is to take it out of the freezer about 3 hours before you're going to be baking your bread. Brush it with butter so that it won't dry out, and then let it rise to double its size. And if you let it sit long enough, it'll get this big. The next step is to melt 1 stick of butter, and to that you're going to add some herbs. Now you can either add a tablespoon of rosemary, or you could add some dill and some dill seeds, or you could just add a tablespoon of any herb blend. This is a fine herb blend. I'm going to add rosemary today. So you add your tablespoon of herbs, stir that in, and then to get your little pots ready, you need to cut out some parchment circles. And you place a circle in the bottom of each of your flower pots, and this helps keep the dough from coming out of the pot on the bottom. You have that little hole in the bottom. You need to plug that up. Then you just break off some of the dough and roll it in your hand, make little balls, and dip it into the herb butter. And you're going to place about 3 of these into each flower pot. Make sure you get some of the herbs with each one. And because you've played around with the dough here, you've made a lot of the air come out of it, you're going to have to let it sit and rise again for about 20 or 30 minutes. So just set that aside in a warm place, just like you did when you let your dough rise the first time. Now I have some here that have already risen, and these are all ready to bake in the oven at 350 degrees for 12 minutes. Oh, these breads look perfect, and they smell wonderful. Now your guests can just serve themselves out of their individual flower pots. When it comes to beverages for the holidays, nothing says Christmas more than hot spiced apple cider. I like to serve it in a silver punch bowl surrounded by a live wreath of fresh cut herbs. If you're having a holiday party, you can make your spiced cider ahead of time by combining in a crock pot 2 quarts of apple cider and 1/2 cup of light brown sugar. To flavor your cider, you can place cinnamon sticks, whole cloves, and allspice into a square of cheesecloth, tied closed with a cotton string, or you can just use a cotton tea bag that you tie closed securely. Add this to the crock pot and then stir well. and then let this sit for about 2 to 3 hours on low. Now this spice bag will flavor the cider while it cooks, and then at the end of cooking time, you just simply throw it away. Now the crock pot is a very convenient way to cook this cider recipe, but if you don't have one, you can combine all the ingredients in a heavy stock pot and put the lid on, keep it on a low heat for about an hour, just occasionally. Now I like to garnish my spice cider with something that will flavor the cider as well as look festive in the punch bowl. Now you can use little orange cutouts like this if you want to. The way I made these is I took an orange, and this is just a potato peeler, and try to use a new one. You need a very, very sharp edge. And try to cut a very thin piece. You want to leave the white pith, this is the bitter part of the orange, and just get the orange or the colored part. And then just use a small cookie cutter to cut out your shapes. You can use hearts or stars or whatever you have available in a small size. And then just toss these in just before your guests arrive. Or for another garnish, you can take apple slices and slice them sideways and then use a cookie cutter to cut out shapes. Just soak it in lemon juice for about 15 minutes before you put it into your cider. Or you can just use the traditional garnish, which is orange slices studded with whole cloves. And just set this in, again, just before your guests arrive. Now while I have this apple cider over here cooking, I'll show you how to make this beautiful, fragrant herbal wreath. This wreath can be made up to 3 days before your holiday party. Now for this wreath, I've used sprigs of scented geranium and mint and thyme and sage. I used a whole variety of different herbs to give different textures and colors. Now to make your own wreath, you need to buy floral foam, or as it's usually called, floral oasis. Oasis is a green, water-absorbing material which can hold a tremendous amount of water. It not only provides water for your greenery, but it also allows it to be held in place. Now in some areas you can buy oasis which has been shaped into round rings, and if it's available in your area, this really is the most convenient way to make this wreath. You simply soak this oasis ring in water and then stick in your greenery. But here in Southern California, it's very difficult to find oasis rings, and they can be quite expensive. So I'm going to show you an inexpensive way that you can make your own. Now you're going to need 2 blocks of this oasis, and then you're going to also need a round wire ring like this. This is a very large one. I wanted to show you a large one so that I could demonstrate it. But you want to find one which will sit down inside your tray once it's completed. Now I have my wreath sitting on top of a silver tray, and it fits just inside the tray. But if you don't have a tray like this, you can use an aluminum pan like this, which is very inexpensive, and it's usually available at supermarkets and discount stores. Now the reason you want to use a tray underneath the oasis ring is so that you don't get water spots on your tablecloth or on your table. Now the next step is to take your oasis block and cut it into half slices like this. And you can just use a regular knife if you want to. Any kind of a dull knife will do. It's not very hard to cut. Whoops. Then you take your ring and you make an indentation on it so that you can see where to cut to get the shape. Then you take your knife and cut out that shape. And then you're going to let this oasis ring soak in water for at least an hour. And sometimes you have to weight it down a little bit because it will want to tend to float up to the top. Then you place this oasis piece into your oasis ring. And you can just brush off the excess. After it's been soaked in water, place it into the ring. And then you can add your herbs and cut juniper, whatever you have. Now on this particular wreath, I have quite a few different herbs in it. Let me show you how I place those herbs in. This is scented geranium. It's a nutmeg scented geranium. It's variegated and looks really pretty in this wreath. I love to use variegated herbs when I'm making my herbal wreaths. This is also a variegated sage, and you just stick it into the oasis ring. Once the oasis is wet, it really does hold the herbs very well. This is an apple scented geranium, and I like to use the scented geraniums because they have such a wide leaf. They cover up the ring really well. This is a variegated pineapple mint. Stick that in there. And you just continue all the way around until you have your ring completely covered. Now for decorations on this wreath, I've added some fresh flowers. I have some red roses in this one. But you could use any kind of flower that you have available in your area. You could even tuck in a few white mums if you wanted to add a little bit more variety. And you could also tuck in some berries or pine cones or even little bows if you wanted to. Now this wreath should last for at least 3 days and up to 2 weeks, depending upon which plant materials you used. And when your guests arrive, pour in your hot cider so that it's nice and warm, and then add your garnish. And also have plenty of cinnamon sticks available if you can, and put a cinnamon stick into each mug to use as stirrers. This cider smells wonderful, and it tastes even better. If you don't have time to make a live punch bowl wreath, then pour the cider into an antique crock or ceramic bowl and surround the bowl with fresh fruit, pine cones, and greenery. For years, I've made cinnamon art decorations for Christmas out of a mixture of applesauce and cinnamon. The applesauce and cinnamon are mixed together to form a dough, which is then rolled out like a pie crust dough. Shapes are cut out with cookie cutters and dried in the oven. These little cinnamon figures smell wonderful and they last forever. I like to use them as tree ornaments, gift tags, and just as package decorations. And this is a great project for children too. All you need is 10 tablespoons of ground cinnamon and 4 to 5 tablespoons of plain applesauce. Mix that together until it forms a dough. Now it's best if you buy your cinnamon in bulk if possible. Cinnamon can be expensive if you buy it in those small containers in the grocery store. Now roll out your dough to about 1/4 of an inch thick and then take cookie cutters to cut out your shapes. Then onto cookie sheets and bake them in a 150-degree oven if you have a gas oven, or place your electric oven on warm. It's best if you can leave the door open because then that allows some of the moisture to escape. You're not baking these, you're just dehydrating them or drying them out. It takes about 3 or 4 hours before they're finished, and you have to be very careful not to overbake them because they will turn black. The way you check for doneness, these are finished baked ornaments, is you press on the back side and make sure that it doesn't have any moisture. It should be very, very hard. And then after they're finished, you can tie them onto packages or you can use them as tree ornaments. And they're supposed to last forever, but if you ever notice that they're losing their scent, you can add a few drops of essential oil onto the back side of the ornament, and then they'll always smell like Christmas. For another unusual holiday decoration, try drying apple slices and using them on your Christmas packages or as tree ornaments or even as colorful swags. Now this particular swag also has orange slices on it that I dried in the dehydrator, and you can add those if you want to. To make apple decorations, you need to first carefully slice some apples to 1/4 of an inch thick. Now you can either slice them this way if you want to use them as package decorations or tree ornaments, or you can hollow them out using an apple core and then slice them this way to make swags. Take your slices and set them into a bowl of lemon juice and salt. You want to let them soak for about 15 minutes, and the lemon juice will prevent them from browning, and the salt will help speed up the drying process. Now, after your apples have soaked for 15 minutes, you want to place them on parchment-lined cookie sheets, and this will help prevent them from sticking to the cookie sheet. And you want to dry them in a gas oven set on its lowest setting, or in an electric oven, which can be set on warm. You want to leave the door ajar slightly, and this will help some of the moisture escape. Now, after you have all of these on your cookie sheet, place them in your oven, and it takes several hours to dry. If you have a dehydrator, you can dry them on the racks in the dehydrator, and it'll take, probably 6 hours set on medium. Now, you want to watch these apples very carefully to make sure that they don't discolor, because they will turn brown if you over-dry them in the oven. And you'll know that they're finished when they feel dry to the touch, but they're still pliable and leathery. After your apples cool, you can glue them onto packages using a hot glue gun, or you can glue a ribbon to the back for tree ornaments. If you want these ornaments to last for a few years, you can spray them with a clear acrylic spray. Then, if they're stored properly, these dried apples will last for several years as Christmas decorations. Canned cake was definitely my most popular homemade item last Christmas because people just couldn't believe that I had successfully canned a freshly baked cake that would last on the pantry shelf for up to 6 months. When you open the jar, you have a delicious moist cake, which you can serve as a snack, an appetizer, or even a dessert. It's also great for packing on trips or picnics. My favorite canned cake recipe is actually a pumpkin bread recipe. It makes a bread which has a tea bread or quick bread consistency. You can use any tea bread or cake recipe of your own for canned cake, as long as your recipe produces a dry, not a moist cake when it's cooked normally. The reasons for this is because your cake is going to be sealed in the canning jar before it has time to finish cooling, and a lot of the moisture which would normally have escaped is trapped inside the jar. And if you use an overly moist recipe, you end up with a very mushy or soggy cake in the jar. You'll need to use tapered canning jars for this recipe. And this is a tapered jar, and this is not. It's very important that you use the tapered jars because jars like this have a smaller opening, and if you bake a cake in this jar, you won't be able to get it out. So you want to use tapered, and when you're buying these, look for the word tapered on the side or try and find a box with a picture so you can be sure that you have the right kind of jar. Wash your jars in hot soapy water, dry them, and then grease the bottom half of the jar. You don't want to grease up at the top because when you bake the jar, the grease or the butter or shortening, whatever you use to grease it, might discolor. Then you want to mix up your batter according to your recipe. And you'll notice that my batter for this pumpkin bread is very thick. It's like a very thick pancake batter. And I'm just using a canning funnel. This is very thick. I'm just using a canning funnel to fill the jar so that I don't get it all over the sides. And you fill your jar about halfway. After you've filled all of your jars, then you're going to place them on a cookie sheet, and then you're going to wipe off the tops. You don't want to have any batter around the top edge because you're going to need that for sealing. Fill all of your jars, place them on the cookie sheet, and bake them at 325 degrees for 45 or 60 minutes. Be sure never to bake higher than 325 degrees or else you run the risk of your jar cracking. And don't these smell wonderful? Take them out of the oven when they've turned golden brown and the center springs back when you push on it, just like a regular cake. The next step is to immediately place on the canning lids while the jars are still hot. Now these lids have a rubber seal, which must be softened in order for them to seal properly, and each manufacturer has a different method for preparing this lid. Usually it just means placing them in a pan of hot water for a few minutes. So I have some lids here that have been sitting in some hot water. And the next step, dry off the lid a little bit. The next step, hold your jars carefully, place on your lid, and then place on a ring. Be careful not to burn yourself. Now you just want to have this finger tight. Don't have to crank it down because you have to be able to allow the air to escape so it'll create a vacuum seal. After you have all of your lids and rings on, let it sit and cool, and then come back after about 30 minutes and check the seal. Now the way you check your seal is by pushing down in the center. Now this jar is sealed. It doesn't make any noise. This jar here hasn't sealed properly. You can tell because it springs back in the middle. Be sure to store all of your unsealed jars in the refrigerator and use them within 2 weeks. And all of your sealed jars can sit on a pantry shelf for up to 6 months. Here's some of my sealed canned pumpkin breads. I think they turned out great. Now as you can see here, I've removed the outside ring from the jars. You can remove these rings on any canned product after the jar is completely cooled and sealed. The main purpose of this ring is to hold down the lid while the jar is cooling so that the vacuum seal can take place. But once the jar is sealed, the ring's no longer needed. You can keep it on if you want to for decoration, but that's totally up to you. Now it's also a good idea to label all of your jars with the date and contents as soon as they're cool so that you don't forget when you made them. Now I like to decorate my jars and all of my canned goods when I'm giving them as gifts. And one idea that you might like to try is to cut out fabric circles and then put them over the jars like this, and you can tie them with a bow. Another idea is to take, believe it or not, coffee filters, turn them upside down and tie them onto your jars. And another idea is to take paper doilies or fabric doilies and put them upside down over your jar. And you can also use any old-fashioned crocheted or embroidered piece of material that you might have lying around and cut a circle out of that and tie it with a ribbon. Now, if you're like me and you make a lot of gifts from your kitchen at Christmas time, you might consider making gift baskets this year. I like to choose a theme and a color scheme for each one of my baskets, and this one is for a friend of mine who enjoys homemade preserves. So my theme is canning, and my colors are red and brown. Now, I filled this basket with canned goods like jams, jellies, and of course canned cake, and then I also tucked in a few inexpensive canning tools, which I think she might be able to use. Now, this particular tool is one that you saw me use earlier, and it's called a lid magnet. And it's for when you're canning so that you don't have to touch the hot lids. You can use one of these to hold the lid and then place it onto the jar. Also, I thought I'd tuck in a lid holder. Now, lid holders are used for setting the lids down into the hot water just before you put them on top of the jars to seal. And both of these are very inexpensive, and they're usually available through mail order catalogs or in gourmet shops. For regular holiday packages, I always try and come up with new, unusual gift wrapping ideas each year so that each package seems extra special. But this doesn't mean that you have to spend a lot of money on packaging. One of the most versatile gift wraps is plain brown postal paper. It's available at stationery stores and can be used plain with a variety of ribbons. Satin ribbons, jute, twine, wire ribbon, or even this ripped fabric. Now, the way that you do ripped fabric is you take an edge of your fabric and make a little cut in it with a pair of scissors, and then just tear it down, and you have yourself some ripped fabric which can be used on the plain brown postal paper. Another way that you can decorate the paper is you can use stencils or holiday stamps on each package after it's wrapped, or for a Victorian look, you can glue on pressed flowers and herbs onto the corners of your packages and then tie it with some satin or with some lace ribbon. Now, you can also use plain brown paper bags or even white paper bags. They make wonderful packaging for your holiday presents. They can be decorated with stencils and stamps also, or even stickers. Or if you want to get a stained glass look, you can cut out some shapes with an X-Acto knife. Just draw with a stencil pattern onto the package. And I like to use a pencil usually, but I used a dark pen so you could see it on the camera. And then use an X-Acto knife to cut it out. Just place a little board inside the package. Then, after you have it cut out, stick some tissue paper down inside to give the stained glass look. Now, I also love to use the cinnamon art that we made earlier. And I like to tie this onto the packages, and if you plan ahead a little bit and put some holes into the cinnamon art, you can tie them with a ribbon and then just tie them onto the package. Later they can be used as tree ornaments. Or you can just take a glue gun and tie a little ribbon onto the back side and then tie it onto the package. Now also, these little cinnamon arts can be used as to-from gift tags. All you have to do is use a permanent marker to write right onto the cinnamon art, and then just tie it onto the package or onto your vinegar bottle, and they can add a touch of country flair to the holiday packages. Here are some examples of packages I wrapped this year. Be experimental with your gift wrappings. Try using a variety of bows and ribbons, or even fresh greenery like herbs and juniper. And don't be afraid to add your dried apples and cinnamon art to your packages. For a quick and easy gift from the kitchen, you can make lemon herb honey. All you need is 2 cups of honey, and any kind of honey will do, 1 or 2 sticks of whole cinnamon, 1 teaspoon of cloves, and a few sprigs of either lemon balm or lemon verbena. Cut 1 lemon into 8 pieces and pour everything into a big jar and steep for at least 2 weeks. Then you can strain it into decorative jars. Use this lemon honey in tea, over ice cream, or for sauces and glazes, and it makes a wonderful gift. Steamed puddings are delicious old-fashioned desserts which can add a lot of variety to your holiday dessert table. They're different from other puddings because they have the consistency of a very moist cake. They can be light and airy or heavy and rich, and they can be served with a variety of sauces. In fact, any sauce that you would make for bread pudding can be served with a steamed pudding. Right now, I'm going to make a very rich mocha chocolate steamed pudding. It's one of my favorites because it tastes like a moist chocolate brownie. There are many old-fashioned steamed pudding recipes out there, and I've included 2 recipes in the book that comes with this video. Don't be afraid to try new recipes once you know the basic steps to steamed puddings. To make a steamed pudding, you're going to need a special container or a mold with a secure lid. If you can't find an actual steamed pudding mold, you can compromise by either using a coffee can or a Jell-O mold, and you can cover it with parchment paper and tie it with a string, and this helps hold in the moisture. The process of steaming a pudding is really quite simple. First, you take your steamed pudding mold and you spray it with a non-stick vegetable spray. And then you mix up your batter according to your recipe. And this is my mocha chocolate recipe. And you pour it into your pudding mold. This is a 2-quart size pudding mold. And smooth out all the edges so that it's evenly distributed. After you have your lid on securely, you want to set a trivet in the bottom of a tall stock pot that's filled with boiling water. And you want the water level to come up halfway on your steamed pudding mold. Set your mold into the stock pot and put on the lid and keep it at a low simmer for 3.5 hours. After 3.5 hours, remove the mold and let it sit for 15 minutes to cool. Then remove the lid and set it out on a plate to cool completely. Perfect. Steamed puddings can be made ahead of time and stored in the freezer for up to 2 months, or you can store them in the refrigerator for up to 2 weeks, and they make a wonderful finale to any holiday meal. Although they're very, very simple to create, herb-flavored vinegars can make impressive gifts for the holidays. Now I'm going to make some rosemary garlic vinegar, and I'm going to use 2 cups of red wine vinegar, and I'm going to heat it up in an enamel pan. And I'm also going to add a few sprigs of fresh cut rosemary, and if you've washed your rosemary recently, you want to make sure that it's completely dry because water will cloud your vinegar. I'm going to add that. And I also have 2 whole cloves of garlic, which are peeled and halved. Now the reason that I'm using an enamel pan is that you don't want to have any of your vinegars come in contact with metal if it's at all possible, because the vinegar can have an adverse reaction, especially if it's aluminum. So try and use an enamel pan, and if you don't have enamel, you can use stainless steel, but enamel is always the best. Now bring this mixture almost to a boil, and the heating process actually helps the essential oils release from the herbs, and that will flavor the vinegar. When you've heated the vinegar to just the right temperature, and this one's almost boiling, you can remove it from the heat, and then you're going to pour it into a glass jar. Remember, you don't want to have any metal come in contact with it, and you don't want to use plastic if at all possible, because the plastic will absorb all of the flavors. Now I'm just going to pour this into my clean glass jar, and because I have a small batch, I can use a canning jar if I want to. It just makes it a little bit easier to use tongs because this is all very, very hot, and I don't want to burn myself. Okay, then you pour in the rest of this. Make sure you have all of the garlics in there also. Now, when I put on the lid for this, I do have metal on my lid, so I have to put a piece of plastic in between because you want to remember not to have any metal come in contact with the vinegar. Now you'll let this sit aside for about 2 weeks in a cool, dark place. Now here's one that I have, same kind of vinegar, that's been steeping for 3 weeks, and I've already strained it. You'll notice I also had this one covered with plastic. Now it's pretty clear because I strained it with coffee filters. Now you can use coffee filters if you're just doing an herb vinegar, and if you want to do a fruit vinegar, you really have to use cheesecloth because the fruit kind of disintegrates in the vinegar. And it also takes several strainings before you get a clear vinegar, so be patient and strain it as much as you need to get a clear, crystal clear vinegar. Now, the next step is to pour your vinegar into clean and dry bottles. You can use any kind of bottle that you have available. And always use a plastic funnel, not a metal funnel. And if you want to add a sprig of an herb to this, use a fresh sprig. Don't use one of the ones that you heated up because it's usually discolored from being heated. And it's best to put in a fresh, clean, dry sprig. And then you're ready to label and decorate your vinegar. Now you can bottle your vinegar in decorative bottles like I have here, or you can recycle plain soda pop bottles or even ketchup bottles. But no matter what bottle you use, it can look extra nice if you add a wax seal like this, or a foil cover, or even a champagne cork to your bottle. Now these foil covers are available through mail order catalogs which specialize in wine and beer making supplies. And they just slip over the top of the bottle. They're just a little tiny cone that slips over the top of the bottle. And they come in several different colors. Now the champagne corks are also available through mail order catalogs. And it just comes as a little wire that can slip over the cork and then you crimp it closed. What I'm going to show you now is how to make the wax seals. Now what you need to do is melt some paraffin wax, and be very careful with this because it is highly flammable, and it's usually available in supermarkets in the canning section. And to get color, you may have noticed I had color on my wax seals. You can use any crayon and use whatever color you want to use and melt that with your paraffin wax. Now I've melted my wax in a tin, and I filled a pan with water about halfway up the tin, and I melted it on low. Now it takes a while this way, but it really is the safest way. And if you want to add a little bit of fragrance to the wax so that it'll have a scent, you can add some essential oil, and cinnamon or cloves oil is usually the best. Now the next step is to take your vinegar bottle that has already been bottled and corked, and make sure that the cork is in good and tight because you're going to be tipping this bottle upside down. And you want to dip just the top half of this bottle into the paraffin wax. Take it out and twirl it slowly so that the wax distributes evenly, and then just dip it a few more times until you get a good coating on there. And then you want to set this aside and let it dry. And then the next step is just to label your bottles, and for an added touch, be sure to tie on a recipe for how to use that particular vinegar, and it makes a very special and personal holiday gift. Making old-fashioned pomanders has become a very popular Christmas tradition over the years. These fragrant spice balls originated during the medieval times and became popular again during the Victorian era as sachets and air fresheners. These spice balls last forever and are made from citrus fruits or apples which are studded with cloves and then cured in a spice mixture. All you have to do to make your own pomander is to take an orange, a lemon, a lime, or an apple and completely stud it with cloves. You're going to insert the cloves about 1/4 of an inch apart. And it's a good idea to wear a Band-Aid on your finger because your finger can get a little bit sore. And if you want to add a ribbon later, you can use 1/4 of an inch tape, which you can usually find in a fabric store. Be sure to remove the tape before curing, and this leaves a nice gap for the ribbon to be tied around the pomander. And then place your fruit into a curing mixture of powdered cinnamon, cloves, allspice, nutmeg, and orris root. This curing mixture not only adds fragrance to the pomander, but it also preserves it and dehydrates it. Place your fruit all the way into the mixture and completely cover it. Now it's going to stay in this mixture for about 2 or 3 weeks, and you should turn it every day or so you can make sure that the pomander is completely covered. Now when it comes out, you want to make sure that it's rock hard. It doesn't want to be soft at all. And then you can decorate it with ribbons and dried flowers and dried herbs. And you can either hang it on your Christmas tree or you could wrap it up in a handkerchief and use it as a sachet. For a colorful tree ornament, fill clear glass Christmas tree balls with potpourri. You can fill them with store-bought potpourri, your own blend, or just dried rose petals, whatever you have available. What you do is you carefully remove the tops off of the glass balls, and then you stuff little bits of potpourri into the glass ball, and be careful not to cut yourself on the top edge because it is very sharp. After you have the ball filled about halfway, carefully replace the top into the glass ball. And then you can just tie it with lace or ribbons if you want to give it a little bit of a Victorian look. And the muted colors will just touch off a little bit of springtime onto your holiday tree. If you happen to have a fire going during the holidays, you might want to add fragrance to the room by tossing in some fireplace herbs. These little bundles are made from leftover branches of herbs harvested in the fall or any other time that you might cut back your garden. Simply save the leftover branches from herbs such as rosemary, lemon verbena, or lemon balm and tie them into little bundles. When you toss a bundle into the fire, they release their fragrance as they burn. It's a nice way to use every part of the herbs that you grow. Rosemary is my favorite fireplace herb because it just smells a little bit like Christmas. If you grow sunflowers in your area, pick the blossoms after the sunflower seeds have formed and hang them up to dry. Later, they can be transformed into decorative bird feeders by simply gluing on cracked walnuts and wheat stalks with a hot glue gun. The birds can just help themselves to a winter snack. There are many methods for making herbal wreaths, and one of the easiest is to cut little bundles of fresh herbs like this, and later attach them to a wreath base. What's nice about this method is that you have a fresh herbal wreath which lasts for about 2 weeks, and later, when the herbs dry, you have a dried wreath which can last for years. I'm going to be letting these herbs dry in the wreath, so I want to choose herbs which dry well and hold their color. Some examples of some good drying herbs include thyme, sage, marjoram, oregano, bay tree, lamb's ears, and feverfew. These little plants are called lamb's ears. They have soft leaves which really do feel like lamb or bunny ears. They're considered an ornamental herb, and they grow in partial shade here in California. Now I'm going to use some of these lamb's ears in my wreath, so I want to cut little bundles that are no more than about 6 inches long. Now if you grow your own herbs, you're going to have to cut your herbs in the morning before the heat of the day hits them. And remember, you don't have to grow your own herbs. You can use herbs from the market or produce store. Now after cutting, you should tie your herbs with a rubber band. I like to use rubber bands because as the herbs dry, the stems tend to shrink. And if you use a string, then the herbs can fall out as the bundles dry. With rubber bands, as the stems shrink, the rubber band holds them together well. Now you would use the same basic method of gathering herbs if you were going to dry them rather than use them in a fresh wreath. The only difference is that the bundles could be larger and you would hang them upside down to dry. Now let's get these herbs inside so that I can show you how to make that fragrant herbal wreath. To make this wreath, you're going to need a straw or a grapevine wreath base like this one, and some number 26 or number 28 floral wire. Both of these things are available at floral supply or craft stores. Now, to make the wreath, you're going to tie one end of your wire to the wreath base, and then you're going to set some of the herbs onto the wreath base with one hand, hold that steady, and then just pull the wire around and wrap it around the wreath so that the herbs are held in securely. And if you have a lot of herbs in one pass, you can go around twice to hold them tightly. And you just keep going like this in one direction. I'll use some sage here. And then when you get all the way done, you tie off the wire at the back, and you can also tie on a hanger if you want to. Let me show you what this wreath looks like completed here. This is the completed, finished wreath. I've got all kinds of herbs in here. I've got sage, marjoram, juniper, the lamb's ears, feverfew. We have some bay leaf tree leaves over here. Now you can add a bow like I have here, or if you want to, you can get little pine cones. These are also available at the floral supply store, and you can wire them yourself. They also come wired. You can add pine cones to your wreath if you want to, or you can tuck in some little berries, anything that you have available, whatever you want to add to make your wreath festive. Now if you really want to stay all natural, you can take flowers. I have carnations here, and you can buy these floral picks that are also available at the craft shops. I filled this one with water, has a little hole in the top. You stick the flower down inside so it has its own little vial of water, and then you can stick this down inside of the wreath and wire it on, and you can add color to your wreath that way. I think for this wreath, I'm just going to leave the bow on. But if you want to let this wreath dry, it will last about 2 weeks fresh. And then after it's dried, it lasts for many years. You just have to be careful how you store it. Let me show you some dried wreaths. This is one that was done completely with bay leaf leaves, and it's dried. This is about 5 years old. It still looks great. And this one is a Dusty Miller wreath, heart-shaped wreath. And it was done several years ago, and I've tucked in some little dried flowers to give it some color. But I really prefer the fresh wreaths the best, and I think that it's a wonderful project to do at Christmas time, to hang on your front door. I think this wreath will look great on my front door. I hope that this video gave you some new ideas for how to incorporate fresh herbs and spices into your holiday festivities. And I hope that this holiday season brings you a wonderful country fresh Christmas of your own, filled with all the old-fashioned fragrances and flavors of Christmases past. Have a very Merry Christmas. For your convenience, we've included the following recipes on this tape in case you lose your recipe booklet. Then you'll always have them on hand for your own country fresh Christmas.